She stole his death with a trembling hand. "Careful, little thief," the mafia boss said, low enough for only her to hear. "If you were saving me, you just made yourself mine to question. If you were betraying me, you won't live long enough to regret it." Her name was Elena Russo. She was a waitress with a trained palate, a ruined family name, and the kind of silence that made powerful men uneasy. In 2 minutes, she would switch a poison glass of Barolo right under Dante Salvatore's nose. In 2 hours, she would be locked inside the villa of the most feared man in Naples. The secret she carried was older than the wine in his cellar. Her dead father had hidden proof inside a ledger no one had found. And if Dante discovered why her hands had shaken before she touched his glass, it would either save both of them or burn his entire empire to the ground. The first thing I noticed about him was not his face. It was the sound. A soft tap. Metal against crystal. Slow enough to be deliberate. Expensive enough to make me nervous before I even looked up. I stood at the end of the private dining room with a bottle of Barolo cradled in both hands, and that little sound kept threading through the low hum of male voices, through the whisper of jacket sleeves, through the clink of silver on porcelain. Tap. 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 His signet ring against the stem of his wineglass. No one else at the table made noise without seeming to ask permission first. The room was all dark walnut and candlelight and the heavy scent of truffle, butter, and money. Men in black suits sat around the long table with that peculiar stillness powerful people perfected, never relaxed, only pretending to be. Their guns made hard little lines beneath their jackets. Their watches flashed when they reached for bread they barely touched. And at the center of them sat Dante Salvatore. I knew his name the way everyone in Naples knew it. Quietly. Carefully, like saying it too loud could make him look your way. He was not the loudest man in the room. He was the reason it stayed quiet. I moved toward the table when the maître d' gave me a nod. My shoes did not make a sound on the rug. My fingers were steady around the bottle because I had spent 3 years teaching them to be steady, no matter what the rest of me was doing. Pour, turn the wrist, no spill. That was what my father used to say. My father had taught me wine the way other men taught their daughters prayers. By scent first, then by patience, then by truth. Good wine always told on itself if you listened long enough. So when I stepped behind Dante Salvatore's chair and the air above his glass rose to meet me, I knew something was wrong before I even tipped the bottle. The Barolo should have opened warm. Cherry, leather, earth after rain. Instead there was a thin, bitter edge beneath it. Almond. My breath stopped halfway in my throat. Not much. Just enough to make the inside of my mouth go cold. I did not look around. I did not gasp. I did not turn toward the kitchen. Men like these smelled panic the way dogs smelled blood, and once it was in the room, it never really left. I kept pouring. A server on my left set down a fresh plate. Another reached for a basket of bread. One of Dante's men laughed at something I did not hear. My heart started hitting so hard I could feel it in my wrists. My father had once held a glass under my nose and said, "When people want to kill quietly, they hide it inside what is already desired. Wine, sugar, perfume, marriage." I finished pouring and moved to the next guest. My hands had begun to shake. I hated that he would see, because he did see. I felt it before I looked. A shift in the air, subtle and sharp. The weight of attention. Dante Salvatore had stopped tapping his ring against the glass. He was watching my hands. The man across from him kept talking something about shipments, ports, numbers. But Dante did not answer. He only looked at my fingers around the neck of the bottle. At the tremor I could not control, I had 3 choices. Say something and die for accusing the wrong man in a room full of wolves. Walk away and let him drink. Or move. I moved. It happened so quickly I almost convinced myself afterward that it had not. I bent as if to adjust the candle near his elbow. My tray slid against the table edge. My left hand caught his glass. My right replaced it with the untouched one beside the nearest guest before anyone could truly register it. A stupid trick. A waitressing trick. a sleight of hand born from too many Saturday nights in crowded dining rooms. The poisoned glass was suddenly on my tray, his eyes lifted to mine. God, I had never seen eyes that still. Dark, yes, but not soft dark. Stone dark. Like old church marble after rain. He did not look surprised. He looked interested in a way that made my knees feel weak. The guest beside him frowned. That was mine. I smiled because I had to. Forgive me, sir, my mistake. Then I turned, tray balanced on one palm, and walked away with Dante Salvatore's death sitting 6 inches from my hand. I reached the service station and set the tray down too carefully. One of the kitchen boys brushed past me. My lungs refused to work properly. I stared at the glass. The deep red wine shivered once in the candlelight. I should have thrown it out. Instead, I made the mistake of touching the rim. Don't. The word came from right behind me. Low. Close. I spun so fast my hip hit the counter. Dante stood there, as if he had stepped out of the dark paneling itself. No bodyguard in sight. No sound to warn me. He looked at the glass. Then at my face. Then at my hands, still shaking so badly now that I curled them into my apron. Did you mean to save my life? He asked. Or insult my intelligence? He lifted one finger. I stopped. The kitchen noise seemed far away. Pans, voices, running water. None of it reached the narrow strip of air between us. His hand moved past me, not touching, only close enough for the heat of him to find my skin. He took the poisoned glass by the stem and raised it to his nose. Not a full inhale. Just enough. His jaw tightened once. There it was. So slight I could have missed it if I had not been staring. He knew. You smelled it, he said. Yes. And instead of making a scene, you stole my glass. I swallowed. I didn't know who was watching. His gaze dropped again to my hands. The shaking embarrassed me now in a way it had not while I was moving. Action was cleaner than aftermath. You were afraid, he said. Yes, but you did it anyway. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not sound foolish. For a second, something unreadable moved across his face. Not softness. Definitely not that. More like an old thought returning where it was not welcome. Then he stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to make the rest of the room disappear. Little thief, he murmured. The words should have sounded amused. They did not. They sounded like a mark being placed where everyone else could not yet see it. I forced myself to lift my chin. If you're going to have me killed, do it before service ends. Rosa will be furious if table 6 waits for dessert. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Something more dangerous because it was almost one. No one kills you tonight. Relief came too fast, too hard. Then he added, You don't go home either. He turned and walked out of the kitchen with the glass in his hand. A moment later, 2 men in black stepped into the doorway. The taller one said very politely, Miss Russo, come with us. Behind them, I heard that small sound again from the dining room. Tap. 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 A ring against crystal. The door closed behind me and locked from the outside. I woke to silence heavy enough to feel expensive. Not city silence. Not my kind, where scooters cuffed below the window and lovers fought in the alley and somebody always dragged a chair across old tile at the wrong hour. This was country house silence. Curated silence. The kind rich men bought by building walls between themselves and everyone else. I lay under linen sheets, staring at a ceiling painted the color of cream, trying to remember whether I had dreamed the private dining room. Then I heard a key turn in the door. Not a dream. I sat up too quickly. The room tilted. I had been brought to the villa sometime after midnight, though I remembered only fragments. Leather seats, dark glass, the city lights dropping away. No one had tied me up. No one had spoken much. That had made it worse somehow. The door opened and a woman in her 50s walked in carrying a tray with coffee, toast, and a boiled egg. So perfect it looked offended by my life. She had silver threaded through black hair, sensible shoes, and the face of someone who had seen everything and chosen survival over shock. Eat, she said. Am I a prisoner? She set the tray down on the small table by the window. If you were a prisoner, the coffee would be worse. I blinked. That almost made me laugh, which felt deranged enough to prove I was frightened. I'm Rosa, she said. Housekeeper. Cook. Occasional miracle worker. Elena. I know. Of course she did. She watched me for a moment, then softened by half an inch. No one here will hurt you without permission. That is not comforting. It was not meant to be. She left before I could ask anything else. I crossed the room on cold marble and looked out the window. The villa sat on a rise above terraced vineyards silvered by morning fog. Cypress trees lined the drive like soldiers. Beyond them, I caught one sharp slice of sea, beautiful, which was almost insulting. I drank the coffee anyway. An hour later, the same key turned again, and this time the man who filled the doorway seemed much too broad for it. He was maybe 30, maybe older, with a shaved head, a bruised mouth, and the mournful expression of a saint forced into organized crime. Good, he said, eyeing my empty plate. If Rosa thinks you're refusing food, she'll start cooking emotionally and we'll all suffer. I stared. He held out a hand. Nico Belandi, driver, logistics, emergency cleaner of disasters, unwilling victim of everyone's bad decisions. I did not take his hand. Are you here to threaten me? Me. He looked genuinely offended. Signorina, I'm here to escort you downstairs and maybe steal that piece of toast if you're finished. I looked at the toast, then at him. He sighed. Fine, keep the toast. Starve me. One day they'll find my body and Rosa will say she always meant to add more olive oil. Despite myself, I smiled. He pointed accusingly. There. Human expression. Good. Means you probably won't stab anyone before noon. He led me through hallways that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old smoke. Men stood at discreet intervals, armed and expressionless. Paintings watched from gilt frames. Somewhere below, espresso hissed. At the bottom of the main staircase, Dante Salvatore stood beside the long windows with his hands clasped behind his back. He wore black again. Of course he did, not flashy black. Clean, exact black. The sort that made the white cuffs at his wrists look like a threat. Nico leaned toward me and whispered, If I disappear, it's because I said something honest and God judged me. I heard that, Dante said without turning. Nico's face became tragic. See, no privacy. This is why my digestion is poor. Dante looked over his shoulder. Out. Nico spread his hands. If I leave you two alone and she throws a vase at your head, I want it noted I objected. Belandi. Nico sighed toward heaven and shuffled away. Rosa likes me better, he muttered. The room changed when he left. Lighter air gone. Wait back. Dante turned fully toward me. I had been trying not to think about him as a man. It was easier to think about him as a problem with excellent posture. But in daylight he was worse. More real. More controlled. His face held no softness, yet nothing about it was careless. A faint white scar cut through one brow. His mouth looked like it had forgotten the habit of smiling and did not miss it. Did you sleep? He asked. No. He nodded as if this confirmed something. Good. Fear should not be comfortable. Anger flashed up so fast it steadied me. You brought me here. Yes. You locked me in. Yes. I folded my arms because my hands wanted to betray me again. You keep saying things as if being calm makes them reasonable. It makes them true. I hated that line immediately because part of me admired it. He stepped closer. Not enough to threaten, enough to make it clear he decided distances in this house. You saved my life last night, he said. Until I know why you were in a position to do that, you stay where I can see you. I was in a position because I work there. That is not what I asked. I exhaled hard. I smelled it. No. His eyes pinned mine. Why did you choose me? The question landed oddly, as if I had done something stranger than save a man from poison. I looked away first, toward the windows, toward the vineyards. because no one else was moving. Silence. I heard fabric shift. He had come a little nearer. When I looked back, something in his face had changed, not softened, but sharpened inward. Like a knife turned toward itself. You understood the risk, he said. Yes. And your hands shook. I flushed. I noticed. But you did not stop. My throat tightened. Would you prefer I had? He held my gaze for a long beat. Then he said almost thoughtfully, no. There was a cut across my palm from where the tray edge had bitten me last night. I had forgotten it until his attention dropped there. Before I understood what he meant to do, he reached for my hand. I should have pulled back. I did not. His fingers closed around my wrist with terrifying gentleness. He turned my palm upward. The cut was shallow, but against his skin mine looked small and breakable. Rosa should have dressed this, he said. It's nothing. He lifted his eyes. Nothing bleeds. The room thinned. My pulse beat against the place where he held me. He felt it. Of course he did. For one impossible second, I thought he might bring my hand to his mouth. Instead, he released me. The loss of contact felt stupidly immediate. Matteo will ask you questions this afternoon, he said. Answer carefully. Who is Matteo? My patience on a bad day. He turned toward the window again, conversation apparently over. I should have gone. Instead, I heard myself ask. And on a good day? He looked at my reflection in the glass before he looked at me. I don't have good days, little thief. Then he added without raising his voice, you will stay in the East Wing. You will tell Rosa if you need anything. You will not try the gates. The certainty in it hit harder than anger would have. It sounded like the world had already rearranged itself around his decision. The villa had rules, not spoken all at once, not written down. They arrived the way weather did, through changed air pressure, through pauses in conversations when certain men passed, through the fact that every door opened easily from one side and not always from the other. By the third day I knew that Rosa ran the house better than any captain ran the guards. I knew which hall held offices and which held family rooms no one used. I knew the armed men pretended not to watch me and failed, and I knew Dante Salvatore moved through all of it like gravity. Nothing announced him except the way other people's shoulders altered when he entered. Matteo Ricci found me in the library just after noon. He was handsome in a colder way than Dante, fairer, sharper, neat enough to suggest either discipline or vanity, maybe both. His tie was perfectly straight. His expression had the strained politeness of a man being civil for professional reasons only. You read ledger books for pleasure, he asked. I looked up from the account book Rosa had found for me among the shelves. I read whatever no one thinks to hide. His mouth almost twitched. That line would be charming if you were less dangerous. I'm a waitress. Matteo closed the door behind him. You're a woman who switched Dante Salvatore's glass in a room full of armed men. That was stupid, not dangerous. In our world, those are often the same thing. He sat across from me and asked precise questions in a precise voice. My shifts at the restaurant, my co-workers, which suppliers I saw most often, whether anyone had spoken to me the week before, offered money, asked about private parties, changed bottle storage, broken seals. I answered everything I could. He listened like a man laying tiles. When I mentioned my father had taught me wine, his eyes sharpened. Your father? Paolo Russo. A beat passed. Only one. Small enough that someone less nervous might have missed it. My condolences, Matteo said. I stared at him. You know the name. I know many names. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It isn't. He left 20 minutes later with my skin prickling from the sense that I had missed something important. Rosa sent for me after lunch. I found her in the downstairs kitchen, supervising 3 pots at once, while Nico leaned against the counter, eating fennel with the expression of a condemned man. Rabbit food, he told me mournfully. I used to dream of lasagna. Now I dream of sodium levels. Rosa slapped his hand with a wooden spoon when he reached toward a tray of biscotti. You dream of me, unfortunately. Nico pressed his palm to his heart. Cruelty, public cruelty. It was so absurd, so normal in its own broken way, that I laughed before I remembered where I was. Rosa looked pleased with herself. Nico looked triumphant, as if he had personally restored joy to the household. Then Dante walked in, and the room tightened around itself. He said nothing at first, just watched me standing there with flour dust on my sleeve from helping Rosa shape dough. The ring on his right hand caught the light. Tap. He rested his knuckle once against the stone counter, an echo of crystal. Come, he said. No one asked where. He led me down a narrower stair at the back of the house, through air that cooled with each step. The cellar door was oak-banded in iron, heavy enough that it needed both his hand and mine to move. My palm slipped on the worn metal latch. He noticed. He always noticed. Inside, the temperature dropped further. Rows of bottles vanished into shadow. Dust, cork, old wood, the faint, damp mineral breath of earth. It smelled like memory, like my father's hands. I stopped without meaning to. Dante turned slightly. You know this room. No, I said too quickly. I know what it reminds me of. He waited. I hated that about him. He could make silence feel more invasive than questioning. My father managed a cellar once, I said at last. Before prison. The words sounded blunt in the cool dark. He was accused of cutting a vintage with cheaper stock, sabotaging labels. He said he was set up. I shrugged because the alternative was shaking again. Everyone says that, I suppose. Not everyone lies. I looked at him. He had not said it gently. He had said it like fact. My chest tightened for reasons that had nothing to do with hope, and everything to do with how dangerous hope became when a man like him handed it over carelessly. He moved deeper into the cellar and stopped before a rack of recent shipments. Tell me what you smell. I blinked. From closed bottles? You're the expert. I never said that. No, he said. Your hands did. Heat rose to my face. He had no right to make that sound intimate. Still, I stepped closer and worked by memory. Cork age, seep lines, wood type. The storage record clipped beside the crates. One case had been moved recently. 2 recently. Its straw packing sat looser. The paper tack seal had been lifted and smoothed again. Clumsy to anyone else. Not to me. This one, I said. He did not look surprised. Why? The capsule was reseated, and whoever did it touched 2 bottles before deciding on one. See the smear? Oil from fingers on the foil. Not kitchen staff. Too careful. Not expert either. A strange quiet followed. Then, for the first time since the dining room, I saw respect cross his face like a shadow of light. Not warmth. Something rarer. Behind us, a phone buzzed. Dante answered without taking his eyes off me. He listened, said only, "No one leaves the port," and hung up. What happened? I asked. Someone moved against one of my shipments. Because of the poison? Because of me. Then, before I could stop myself, I said, "Those are not always the same thing." He looked at me for a long moment, and in that moment, with cold air around us, and dust in the light, and the door shut behind us, something pressed close between my ribs that had nothing to do with fear. Almost. Then the cellar door opened above, footsteps descending fast. "Boss," Nico called. "You need to hear this before Matteo starts using the furniture as a weapon." Dante glanced once at me. "Stay here, little thief." He went upstairs without waiting to see if I obeyed. I did, but not before I touched the neck of the tampered bottle and wondered why Matteo Ricci had gone so still when I said my father's name. Dante Paolo Russo's daughter. Dante had known the instant she stepped into the private dining room, though it took him until the cellar to be certain. The eyes were wrong, for Paolo hers were darker, watchful, where his had been open. But the hands were the same. Capable hands. Honest hands. Paolo Russo had died in prison for trying to stop Vittoria Serra from poisoning Dante's mother. Elena still believed her father had died a thief, and somewhere inside the Salvatore estate, a man Dante trusted was helping history pour itself into a glass again. The attack began with the sound of dishes breaking upstairs, not one plate. Several. Fast. Then the short, ugly thunder of gunfire in a house made for echoes. Rosa cursed in pure Neapolitan and shoved me toward the pantry before I could think. Inside. What? Move. The kitchen had gone from warm and fragrant to metallic in a heartbeat. Men shouted down the hall. Nico appeared in the doorway carrying a pistol in one hand and, absurdly, a baguette in the other. I was eating, he said, offended with the universe. Does no one respect lunch? Rosa snatched the bread from him and smacked his arm. Take her. He grabbed my elbow and steered me through the back corridor just as another shot cracked close enough to make plaster dust sift from the ceiling. I had never heard gunfire indoors before. It sounded smaller than in films, sharper, meaner, like a door slamming inside bone. Nico hauled me around a corner. Freezer, he said. For 1 minute. 2, maybe. That is not better. It is today. He shoved open the heavy stainless steel door and bundled me inside. The cold hit so fast it felt personal. Racks of meat swung slightly from ceiling hooks. Condensation glowed in the strip light overhead. Nico pointed at a crate of frozen peas. If I die, tell Rosa I wanted pasta. That is not a real last wish. It is if you've lived with boiled chicken. Then he was gone, and the door thudded shut. The latch did not catch properly. I noticed because the sound stayed wrong, not sealed, just closed. My breath came out white, my whole body shook within seconds, not fear now, but temperature. The freezer smelled of iron, rosemary, and old frost. Somewhere beyond the metal walls, men were shouting. Something heavy fell. Then silence. Not safety silence. Listening silence. I should have stayed hidden. Instead, I took one step toward the door. It opened inward before I touched it. Dante came in sideways, one hand on the handle, the other holding a gun low by his thigh. He shut the door behind him, and for a second all I could hear was our breathing. There was blood on his cuff. Not much. Enough. You're hurt, I said. It isn't mine. I was not sure that helped. He took in the room with one glance, then me. My arms wrapped around myself, my teeth beginning to knock. You shouldn't be in here this long. I had not planned on scheduling it. The absurdity of the answer hit me at the same moment a delayed tremor from the gunfire did. My knees weakened. I hated my body for doing that in front of him. He saw. Of course he did. Without a word, he shrugged out of his jacket and stepped close enough to settle it over my shoulders himself. The lining was still warm from him. Beneath cedar and cold night air, there was that darker scent again, the one I had noticed when he stood behind me in the restaurant. Not cologne exactly. Smoke, maybe. Winter stone, man returning from outside. Hold it closed, he said. My fingers were clumsy. He covered them once, briefly, guiding the fabric together beneath my throat. The backs of his knuckles brushed the base of my neck. Everything in me went still. The freezer hummed softly. Far away, a man shouted orders. Dante's gaze dropped to where my hands clutched his coat, then lower. There was blood on the hem of my dress. I stared stupidly at it until he crouched. A shard of broken plate had sliced the side of my calf while Nico dragged me through the kitchen. I had not even felt it over everything else. It's shallow, Dante said. He took a clean towel from a shelf, wet it from the emergency tap, and pressed it against the cut, his hand spread warm and hard around my ankle. I sucked in breath. His head lifted sharply. Pain? No. A lie. But not about the cut. For a moment we stayed like that, his hand at my leg, my back against frozen metal, the air between us turning dangerous in a new and entirely unhelpful direction. He rose slowly, too slowly. My lips parted before I could stop them. His eyes went there, stayed, almost. Then the radio clipped at his belt crackled alive with Mateo's voice. East corridor secure, one alive. The spell broke so abruptly, I swayed. Dante stepped back at once. It should not have felt like a loss after only a second. It did. Stay behind me, he said. He opened the freezer and the kitchen rushed back in all heat and noise and the copper smell of blood. A man lay face down near the stove, Another slumped against the far wall, groaning into a hand over his shoulder wound. Rosa stood in the center of it all with a saucepan like she meant to finish what the guns had started. Nico leaned against the island, clutching his side. "Good news," he told me faintly. "I'm not dead. Bad news, Rosa still won't let me have bread." Rosa rolled her eyes so hard it was nearly affectionate. Matteo came in a moment later, immaculate except for a smear of blood at his collar. One attacker survived long enough to speak. Dante looked at him. Matteo's gaze flicked toward me. He said, "Sarah." The name meant nothing to me. To Dante, it meant everything. I saw it in the stillness that dropped over him, colder than the freezer had been. Something old entered the room and stood behind his eyes. "Take her upstairs," Matteo said. "No," Dante said. "Just that. Quiet. Final." Matteo's jaw tightened. "She should be moved off-site. Not yet." I looked between them. "Who is Sarah?" Neither answered immediately, which was answer enough. At last, Dante said, "A man who should have stayed buried in the part of my life I no longer discuss." Then he looked at the towel tied around my leg, at his jacket still hanging from my shoulders, and something in his face changed by a degree so small another woman might not have seen it, but I had started noticing fractions with him. Fractions were all he gave. When he walked me from the kitchen, his hand did not touch my back. It hovered there. Almost. The truth came out over dessert. That seemed fitting. Cruel, but fitting. Rosa had put me to work because apparently surviving an armed attack did not exempt anyone from peeling pears. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, orange zest, and hot sugar. Outside the high windows, rain striped the courtyard stones. Inside, the staff moved with hushed efficiency, every voice lower than usual after yesterday's violence. I was grateful for the work. Work narrowed the world. Hands moved. Mind followed. No room for the memory of Dante's fingers at my ankle. No room for the knowledge that I had wanted him to stay in that freezer 1 second longer than either of us should have. Rosa had me poach pears in red wine until they blushed dark and tender. Then I made a bitter chocolate base because sweetness alone felt dishonest. Over that went blood orange cream. On top, a spun sugar shell I caramelized until it gleamed amber and fragile. Nico wandered in as I was plating the third one. He squinted at the dessert. "Is this edible, or are you punishing a man artistically?" "Both, if God loves me," Rosa said. I laughed despite myself. Nico leaned over the plate dramatically. "What is it called?" I looked at the layers, the dark beneath, the bright middle, the breakable surface that would shatter at the slightest pressure. "I don't know yet. That," Nico announced, "means it's emotional." Rosa shoved him out of the way with her hip. "Take one to the office." He looked scandalized. "Me? To the boss? With feelings on a plate? With a spoon too, if you want to live." He picked up the tray and muttered as he left. "If he kills me over dessert, tell my mother I died elegant." I was still smiling when Matteo entered the kitchen. That smile disappeared quickly. He stood just inside the doorway, watching the plated desserts as if they were coded messages. "You cook. I wait tables. Sometimes there is overlap." He stepped closer. "The boss is reviewing old shipment logs. He asked for you." A thread tightened low in my stomach. "Why?" "He'll tell you." Matteo's gaze dropped to my hands. Sugar clung to one knuckle. Without thinking, I licked it away. His expression changed. Not desire, appraisal. Something about it chilled me. In Dante's office, the rain sounded louder against the tall windows. He stood at the desk with several open ledgers spread before him. Nico hovered near the fireplace, watching Dante taste my dessert with the solemnity of a priest witnessing a miracle. "Well?" Nico demanded. Dante set down the spoon. "Leave. That's not a review." "Belandi." Nico pointed at the plate. "I'm telling her you liked it because I value truth in dark times." He escaped before Dante could answer. I had not meant to ask, but the question came anyway. "Did you?" Dante's eyes lifted to mine. It tasted like someone building armor out of sugar. The line struck straight through me. I looked at the dessert. Bitter chocolate. Orange. Glass-thin shell. I didn't mean... I know. That was worse. Because it meant he saw things I had not offered. He gestured to the ledgers. Come here. I moved to the desk. The pages smelled of dust and ink and old cork. He turned one book toward me. Several shipment entries had been marked with a symbol I knew before I fully recognized it, a tiny scored line beneath the vintage year. My pulse stumbled. I've seen that mark, I said. Where? I did not answer immediately, because the truth had lived folded and hidden for so long that speaking it felt like breaking something open. Dante waited. I hated that I trusted his silence more than other people's reassurance. My father used to make that mark, I said. Not on public books, on private records. It meant the bottle had been handled after storage. Not bad. Just watched. Dante went very still. I reached for the ledger and turned 3 pages at once. There. Again. Then again, years apart. A pattern. Certain shipments. Certain dinners. This isn't new, I whispered. No, he said. The office seemed to contract around us. I looked up. You knew my father. I knew of him. That is not the same. No. Rain hit the windows harder. Somewhere in the house a door closed. I swallowed. He told me, before they took him, that he had tried to warn the wrong men. I thought prison broke his mind. Then he died before appeal. My voice thinned despite my efforts. I never told anyone because it made him sound guilty and mad at the same time. Dante's face had gone unreadable again, which meant something mattered very much. Before I could press him, the office door opened. Matteo stepped in without knocking, followed by 2 guards carrying a small metal strongbox. We found this in her room, he said. My blood turned to ice. You searched my things? Matteo ignored me. Dante's attention sharpened. Open it. I can, I said too quickly. Every man in the room looked at me. The key had long since disappeared. But my father had taught me something else about boxes meant to protect truth from frightened people. Frightened people always chose the same cheap lock. I took the hairpin from my braid and knelt at the strongbox. My hands trembled once, then steadied. Twist. Blift. Pressure. The mechanism clicked. Nico, appearing in the doorway as if conjured by gossip, whispered, Madonna, she opens locks now. Inside lay a folded recipe book, a photograph of my parents in front of a vineyard wall, and a strip of paper sewn into the spine. Matteo took a step toward it. I snatched it first. Too late. Dante had seen the panic on my face. What is it? He asked. I stared at the stitching I had known about for years and never been brave enough to cut open. I don't know. Which was true. But I knew suddenly and sickeningly that whatever my father had hidden there was why my room had been searched. And if someone inside this house knew to look, then someone inside this house had been close enough to my life long before the poisoned wine. Dante's voice dropped. Give it to me. I looked from him to Matteo, and for the first time, I was not sure which man felt safer. War arrived in the shape of wedding bells, not real ones, recording ones. The old chapel on the Salvatore estate had not held a wedding in years, but someone had wired the cracked bell tower to ring from a portable speaker hidden in the vines. It began just after dusk, as Dante and I crossed the lower path toward the storage annex where he kept records too sensitive for the main house. The sound floated over the rows of grapes, sweet and wrong and impossible in the dark. I stopped. Do you hear that? Dante already had. His hand shot back, catching my wrist before I took another step. Down. A bullet struck the stone wall where my head had been half a second before. He yanked me behind the low terrace barrier and the night shattered open. Gunfire hammered through the vines. Men shouted from 2 directions. Gravel spat under boots. I hit the ground hard enough to knock breath from my lungs, and Dante's body covered mine before the second volley came. He did not say it would be fine. He said into the shell of my ear, When I move, you run to the chapel door and do not turn around. Then he rose into the dark with terrifying calm. I had seen armed men before. I had seen the aftermath of violence now. Blood on tile and bodies face stone in kitchens. But I had never seen Dante in motion when the cost was me. There was nothing wild in his face. That was the worst part. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had long ago taught fear to wait its turn. One shot, pivot, another. He dragged one attacker from behind a stone column and disarmed him with such brutal economy I felt sick even before I saw the man fall. Someone grabbed me from behind. I bit down on a scream because teeth felt more useful. My attacker cursed, wrenching my shoulder, and then Dante was there. His gun empty now. His knife in hand. The man vanished from my body in a wet rush of sound I would hear in dreams for months. Dante caught my face between both palms. Look at me. I did. Blood streaked one side of his throat, not his. Are you hit? I don't know. He searched me with his eyes, then with quick, controlled hands over ribs, arms, waist. When his palm pressed just above my hip, I gasped. His head snapped up. That? A graze, I think. He swore softly in Italian and backed me toward the chapel. More men were shouting below. Sirens in the distance, though not close enough to matter. Inside, the little chapel smelled of damp stone and old wax. Moonlight cut through the broken rose window in pale fragments. Dante shoved the door shut and dropped the iron bar into place. Only then did I realize he was breathing hard. Blood ran from a crease along his ribs, soaking the side of his shirt. You're hurt? Later. No. I tore a linen cloth from the altar rail. I would probably burn for that in some smaller, pettier corner of hell, and pressed it to his side. He made a sound low in his throat, not pain, exactly. Annoyance that pain existed at all. My hands shook so badly the cloth slipped. He caught both my wrists. There it was again. That look, dark and concentrated and far too intense for the space between us. You're trembling, he said. People keep shooting at us. That isn't why. I should have denied it. Instead, I whispered, then don't ask me what the other reason is. For a second, nothing moved. Not the air, not the candle stubs, not my pulse, though that was impossible. His gaze dropped to my mouth and stayed there. Mine fell helplessly to his. There was blood at the corner. I reached up before I could think and wiped it away with my thumb. His composure cracked. Only a fraction. Enough. He leaned down as if every part of him hated the need and could not refuse it anymore. When his mouth touched mine, it was not rough. That shocked me. It was careful, almost reverent, like he was restraining 10 different hungers behind one impossible gentleness. I had never been kissed like that, never kissed at all in a way that made me feel more seen than touched. I made a small sound into his mouth. Not confidence. Not invitation. Just the truth of not knowing what to do with how much I wanted him not to stop. He drew back first. Always him. His forehead rested against mine. Say something I can live with. My eyes burned. I'm not afraid of you. He exhaled once, harsh and pained, as if that cost him more than gunfire had. Outside, engines tore up the drive. His men. Still, he did not move at once. Do you know what undid me? He said quietly. I shook my head. In that dining room, your hands. His thumb brushed the inside of my wrist where the tremor still lived. They shook, little thief. You were afraid enough to break, and you reached for my glass anyway. Something inside me gave way so suddenly it felt almost like grief. He kissed my forehead then, once, and stepped back before I could ask him not to. When the door opened, Matteo and the guards flooded in. The night rushed after them. Port and South Road both hit, Matteo said. Syrahs moved openly. War then. Real war. Dante's hand found the back of my neck for one brief, grounding second. Then it was gone, and everything changed. War made the villa louder. Phones ringing at all hours, men moving at a run instead of a measured walk. Engines starting before dawn, the metallic cough of weapons being cleaned in rooms that had once held music. Even the silence changed. It no longer felt purchased. It felt braced. Nico got shot on a Tuesday. He tried to joke through it, which somehow made the blood worse. The bullet went through his shoulder as he shoved me behind the armored SUV outside the city warehouse. I had insisted on coming because Dante needed the shipment records in the back office, and I could read the coded vintage marks faster than any of his men. We were there less than 9 minutes before the first motorcycle came screaming around the corner. By the time Dante put 2 men down and the third fled, Nico was sitting on the pavement staring at the blood soaking his shirt with deep personal offense. I knew it. He told me through clenched teeth as I pressed a scarf to the wound. This is what happens when you avoid carbs. No padding. Straight to organs. You are not hit in the organs, I said, crying anyway. Not yet. Rosa nearly killed him herself when we got him home, not because he was shot, because he tried to stand up and flirt while she was cutting the shirt off him. I loved him, she announced to no one in particular. Briefly, then he spoke. Nico, pale as cream, managed. You admit there was a briefly. It would have been funny if I had not felt responsible. Because I was. If I had not asked to go. If Dante had not brought me. If Nico had not turned at exactly the right second. The logic spiraled so viciously I almost welcomed Dante's anger when it came. He found me on the east terrace after midnight. Wind moved through the cypress trees and the sea below looked like black glass. I had been holding the train ticket for 20 minutes by then, though I had not decided yet whether I hated it more for existing or for tempting me. He took the ticket from my hand without asking. Florence, he said, then Paris. His eyes lifted. I forced myself to keep speaking. An oenology program I applied before any of this. I got the letter 2 weeks before the dinner. I never answered. Dante folded the ticket once. Perfectly. You should go. The words landed so hard I forgot to breathe. What? You should leave before Sarah reaches the house itself. Anger hit a second later. Hot and humiliating. So that's it? What did you expect? I stood up so quickly the chair scraped stone. I expected you not to drag me into this world and then dismiss me like luggage with better posture. He went still in the way that meant danger. But I was too hurt to retreat. You don't get to decide. I matter only when I'm useful, I said. His jaw tightened. Useful? You brought me to warehouses, to meetings. You ask what I can smell, what I can weed, what I remember. Then Nico bleeds, and suddenly am to be packed onto a train? He stepped closer. The wind flattened my dress against my legs. Nico bled because I failed to end this sooner. No, he bled because he protected me. Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or anger forced down until it thinned into something colder. Yes, he said. That is exactly why you're leaving. I looked at the ticket in his hand, at the signet ring glinting faintly in the terrace light, at the man who had kissed me in a chapel and now looked determined to cut out his own lungs if it meant to spare himself the shape of wanting me. The wind snapped the hem of my dress against my knees. Somewhere below us, a generator kicked on, then settled into its low mechanical hum. You think this is dismissal, Dante said. It's not. It's arithmetic. I laughed once, ugly and breathless. That may be the least comforting thing anyone has ever said to me. It isn't meant to comfort you. He held out the ticket. When men fail to kill me, they look for another door. You became one the night you touched my glass. I stared at him, then closed the door. His face changed. Not much. Enough, I'm trying. That hurt more than anger would have. Rosa found me packing before dawn. She said nothing for a while, only folded 2 sweaters I had not realized I was taking. Then she set the recipe book from the strongbox on top of my case. For trains, she said. People need something to hold while they pretend not to cry. At the station, Matteo stood 3 paces away while I sat on a hard bench and waited for Florence to arrive. Morning smelled like diesel, wet stone, and coffee gone bitter in paper cups. Ordinary people moved around me carrying ordinary lives. A child dragged a stuffed rabbit by one ear. A woman argued into her phone. Nobody here knew what poison smelled like in Old Barolo. I should have been relieved. Instead, I cut the thread in the spine of the recipe book with my hairpin. A strip of paper slid into my lap. My father's hand hit me so hard I had to close my eyes. If I fail, look beneath the chapel floor ledger. Sarah does not poison wine. He poisons trust. The Salvatore boy must know what was done to his mother. The train screamed into the station. Matteo stepped forward. It's time. I looked at the open door. At the future I had once wanted so badly it kept me awake. Paris. Study. Clean hands. A life where my heartbeat did not change every time a man tapped his ring against crystal. Then I looked down at my father's words. The Salvatore boy. Not boss, not monster. Not the name Naples feared. Boy. A son who had lost his mother to a glass. A man who had told me not everyone lied. A man who had kissed me like he was terrified of what gentleness might cost him. The conductor called boarding. I tore the ticket in half. Matteo's face went very still. Elena, I'm not leaving. You're making a mistake. Probably. I stood, clutching the strip of paper so hard it cut my palm. But it's mine. Then I turned away from the train. Away from Paris. Away from the girl I had imagined being. If life had stayed clean, and I walked back into the dark with my eyes open, I walked back in. When I returned to the villa, no one looked surprised except Dante. That told me two things at once. First, that he had believed I might actually save myself. Second, that everyone else in his house had known I wouldn't. He stood in the entry hall with rain still darkening the shoulders of his coat. Men moved around us carrying folders, weapons, radios. Nico, pale and one-armed in a sling, sat on a bench issuing complaints to the universe, while Rosa wrapped more bandage around him than medically necessary. I've been injured in the line of charm, he was saying. At minimum, I deserve pastry. You deserve silence, Rosa said. Then Dante saw me. Everything else in the hall seemed to recede by a fraction. Not stop. Never that. Just thin around the focus of his attention. You missed your train. I changed my mind. His gaze dropped to the torn halves of the ticket still in my hand, then to the blood on my palm from the paper cut. That was expensive, Nico muttered. Romance is terrible for budgeting. Rosa smacked the back of his head so lightly it counted as affection. Dante took one step toward me. Why? I held out the strip of paper. He read it once. A second time. The color in his face did not change, but something behind it did. Something older than anger. Where did you get this? From my father's recipe book. I swallowed. He wrote that if he failed, I should look beneath the chapel floor ledger. He said Sarah poisoned trust. He said you had to know what happened to your mother. Nico stopped talking. Even the men passing through the hall seemed quieter. Dante folded the note with unnerving care. Matteo. I turned. He was standing in the archway to the west corridor, expression arranged into the same clean lines he always wore. I'm here, he said. Dante handed him the note. The chapel opened. Matteo read it, looked at me, then back to Dante. You want the floor lifted now? I want it done before noon. Matteo inclined his head and left. Rosa watched him go with narrowed eyes. That one has the soul of an ironed bedsheet. Nico nodded solemnly. No warmth. No wrinkles. Deeply suspicious. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Dante did not. He took me into his office and closed the door with a softness that felt more dangerous than a slam. You should have gone, he said. I know. That isn't regret on your face. No. My fingers tightened around each other. It isn't. Rain ticked at the windows. On the desk, an untouched crystal glass stood beside a closed ledger. His signet ring tapped it once, twice, then stopped. You came back for the truth, he said. I came back because leaving won't stop Sarah from coming through me if he thinks I matter. The silence after that felt steep. At last he said, you do. I forgot every practiced thing I might have answered with. He looked away first, jaw set hard enough to show strain at the hinge. That isn't an invitation to be reckless. No, it's worse. A rough breath left him. Not quite a laugh. Not quite pain. He came around the desk, close enough that the colder scent of outside still clung to him. If we open that floor and find what I think we'll find, there will be no quiet end to this. There was never going to be one. His hand lifted as if to touch my face. Stopped. Almost. Then a knock broke the room open. Rosa entered without waiting to be invited. Matteo says the chapel crypt is flooded from the storm. He needs her. Dante's head turned sharply. For what? To identify which ledgers would have been moved. Rosa folded her arms. That was his explanation. Mine is that men become idiots in wet stone rooms. I can go, I said. No, Dante said at once. Rosa raised a brow. He has 6 guards. That only proves he expects a problem. I should have listened then. I know that now in the ugly, useless way people know things when it no longer matters. But Matteo had been the one asking precise questions from the beginning. Matteo knew the records. Matteo had seen my father's name before anyone said it aloud. And beneath all my fear, beneath the wanting I barely understood and the loyalty I had chosen without clean logic, there was still the raw old wound of being my father's daughter. I wanted the ledger. I wanted proof. And wanting makes fools of women who think themselves careful. I'm going, I said. Dante's eyes cut to mine. Elena. It's my father, under that floor too. The room went still. He let 3 seconds pass. 4. Then he said, each word stripped bare, take Belandi. Nico straightened in the hall with exaggerated horror. Why am I always included when things smell like death and damp? Because you complain loudly, Rosa said, and traitors prefer quiet victims. Matteo smiled faintly. We won't be long. The chapel was colder than I remembered. Water glistened along the stones, where rain had found cracks in the old walls. Matteo led us past the altar and down the narrow stair beneath it, into the old bottling room below a place of brick arches, rusted racks, and shadows thick as cloth. 2 guards took position at the door. Nico squinted around. If a ghost touches me, I'm resigning. Matteo knelt beside a square of newer mortar. Here. I crouched near him. The air smelled wrong. Not damp stone alone. Machine oil. Fresh. My pulse stuttered. Where are the other men? I asked. Nico went quiet, which frightened me more than any sound he could have made. Matteo stood. The gun in his hand appeared so naturally it took my mind a second to catch up. Upstairs, he said. Busy. Nico moved first, shoving me sideways. The shot cracked through the chamber and hit the wall where my head had been. Matteo fired again. Nico swore and dropped behind a stack of crates, clutching his slinged arm with his good hand. My whole body turned to ice. Matteo looked at me with something like regret and absolutely no mercy. You should have taken the train. A second figure stepped from the far arch. Older, silver at the temples. Beautiful in the way old knives were beautiful, made for injury, well cared for, never softened by time. Vittorio Serra. He looked at Dante's world the way Dante did. That was the worst thing about him. Elena Russo, he said. Your father died loyal to the wrong kind of man. Matteo took my arm. I fought. Of course I fought. Poorly, furiously, stupidly. My shoulders slammed stone. My hair came loose. Nico lunged from behind the crates with a curse so inventive I almost laughed, and Matteo pistol-whipped him back into the dark. Nico! Vittorio's eyes narrowed. Don't bruise what we need. Matteo bound my wrists with plastic ties and dragged me toward the deeper tunnel. As we crossed the threshold, I heard it above us. Rapid, heavy. A door opening somewhere in the chapel. Dante. Too late. They kept me in the old sulfur room beneath the East Vineyard. I knew what it had once been because the air told on it. Even after years of disuse, the walls held the acrid mineral ghost of sulfur candles and cleaning smoke, layered now with damp earth, old wood, and the sweeter rot of spilled wine long dried into the cracks. My wrists were bound in front of me. That was Matteo's mistake. Or Vittorio's. Someone's anyway. They had taken my hairpin. They had not taken the wire tucked inside the hem of my dress where a seam had come loose 2 days earlier. I sat on an overturned crate and breathed slowly until fear stopped trying to turn me stupid. Outside the door, men spoke in low voices. I caught Matteo's clipped precision and Vittorio's smoother murmur, both calm, both certain. Mirror men, I thought wildly. One colder because he had no heart left to lose. One dangerous because he did. A lamp burned on the table opposite me. Beside it sat 3 ledgers, a knife, and the strip of paper from my father's recipe book. Vittorio came in alone after a while. He closed the door behind him and looked at me as if I were a bottle he had not yet decided whether to keep or break. "You have his mother's eyes," he said. "My father's?" "Dante's." Vittorio folded his hands behind his back. "It is inconvenient." I said nothing. People always mistook silence for helplessness. My father had taught me otherwise. Vittorio paced once, slowly. Paolo Russo was competent. More importantly, he was moral. The word sounded like a design flaw. He noticed what he should not have noticed. The wrong seal, the wrong bottle moved to the wrong truce table. He believes truth would save everyone if he delivered it fast enough. My throat burned. Did he? Vittorio's face did not change. No, there were 1,000 things I wanted to ask. Instead, I asked the one that mattered. "Did you poison Dante's mother?" He looked at me almost kindly. "I arranged a correction," he said. "She was persuading her husband toward softness. Softness becomes contagion in families like ours." I thought of Dante in the freezer, tending my cut with careful hands while blood dried on his cuff. Contagion. I hated Vittorio so much in that instant that it steadied me. "You talk like a priest who discovered acid." He smiled. Paolo used to say things like that. My eyes filled before I could stop them. I hated that too. When he left, I bent double as if grief were pain, and pain might excuse movement. Slowly, carefully, I worked the little wire from my hem and fed it into the lock housing of the plastic restraint. Cheap, not elegant. Fear always chose cheap in the end. It clicked on the 3rd try. I did not free myself fully. I loosened it and left my wrists posed as before. Then I crossed to the table and opened the ledgers. The newest book was useless shipments, names, coded transfers. The oldest had been water damaged, half the ink bled. The middle one held a list of family dinners by vintage, seat, incident. The word made my skin crawl. There. One entry 20 years old. Prusse at San Lorenzo. Crystal replaced. Signora L.S. deceased. Below it, in a different hand I knew with a jolt of impossible intimacy, a small scored line, my father's mark, and beside it, barely visible where he had pressed too lightly, S. not M. Sarah. "Tell the boy." The lamp flame trembled when the door opened again. Matteo, this time. He saw the ledger in my hands and the lie in my bound wrists in the same heartbeat. "You are never as innocent as he thinks." "I'm exactly as innocent as I was. You're just worse than I guessed." Something flashed in his face. Not guilt. Resentment. "He let sentiment into strategy," Matteo said. "That's how men like Vittorio take power back." "No," I said. "Men like you give it to them because you can't stand being second." His hand tightened on the pistol. Before he could speak, an explosion thudded somewhere above the vineyard, close enough to rattle dust from the beams. Shouting followed. Matteo cursed and lunged for the ledger. I twisted away, grabbed the lamp, and threw it. Oil spread fire across the old sulfur-stained floor in a greedy rush. Smoke punched upward. Matteo staggered back, swearing. I ran. Not fast enough. He caught my dress at the doorway and ripped the back seam open. I slammed the ledger edge into his face with both hands. Bone cracked. He dropped. I fled into the tunnel, half blind, smoke and tears streaming. The tunnel forked left and right. I chose left because cooler air moved there. Gunfire burst ahead. I hit a wall, turned, and a man came through the smoke at speed. Hard chest. Black coat. The smell of rain and gun oil and cold dark. Dante. He caught my face with both hands exactly as he had in the chapel. Are you hurt? I laughed once, shaking. This is becoming a theme. His forehead touched mine for one savage second. Then he pulled me behind him as a shot sparked off stone. Nico appeared through the haze with his arm in a sling and soot on his cheek. I would like the record to reflect, he shouted over the gunfire, that I was concussed before volunteering for this. Belande, Dante said without turning. Take her out. Nico squinted at the flames licking along the tunnel behind us. This is why I wanted a desk job. I'm not leaving him, I said. Dante looked back then. Really looked. Smoke. Tears. My ruined dress. The ledger clutched against my chest like another organ, and whatever he saw made something in his face open and close again. 3 minutes, he said. That was all. Together we drove upward through the tunnel toward the broken service stair. I used Matteo's fallen gun once and badly, mostly for noise, while Dante moved ahead with horrible precision. At the top landing, Vittorio stood in the doorway to the night, silver hair lit by firelight, one hand already on the detonator clipped to his belt. He looked from Dante to me and smiled without joy. Now, he said, you choose what burns. Then he vanished into the dark. We made it out before the first line of vines went up. But not before all of us understood the same thing. The last battle would be fought in fire. The vineyard burned beautifully. That was the cruelest detail, and therefore the one I could not stop noticing. Flames moved through the rows in long orange seams, neat as stitching at first, then wild where the wind found them. Smoke rolled low over the terraces. Men shouted through it in Italian, their voices ragged and directionless, one moment, disciplined the next when Dante's orders cut through. Somewhere glass exploded in the storage annex. Somewhere else tires screamed on gravel. The Salvatore estate had fed families, bribed judges, sealed treaties, and hidden murders for half a century. By dawn, it looked like a cathedral of ash. I stood in the operations room in borrowed trousers and Dante's spare shirt, the rescued ledger open on the table under my palms. Every line my father had marked formed a pattern when laid over current storage maps, not random poisonings. Routes, hidden transfers through the oldest tunnels. Vittorio had not come only to kill Dante. He had come to inherit the empire by destroying the part of it that could still be clean. This annex, I said, jabbing the map, and the lower reserve cellar. Those are the only two sites that connect the chapel tunnel to the East Vineyard and the old press house. If he planted charges, he'll want the family archive to go with the reserve stock. Matteo's blood had dried on the cuff of my sleeve. I tried not to look at it. Dante stood across from me, one hand braced on the table, the other tapping just once against the crystal paperweight pinning the maps. The sound hit me like memory. Tap. He looked exhausted, not physically alone. Soul tired. The kind of fatigue that sat deeper than sleep. Nico limped in with a bandaged shoulder and a radio. Good news, bad news, and worse news. Which temperament are we serving? Bad, Dante said. Portmen are holding. Family council is pretending support while moving money. Worse news, Sarah's inside the old reserve with 4 men and enough fuel to turn our heritage into a bonfire for the history books. Dante nodded once. Take teams north and west. Nobody fires near the chemical store. Nico squinted at me. If you say you're coming, I'm filing a spiritual complaint. I'm coming. He looked heavenward. There is no God in this house. Dante's gaze cut to mine. No. Yes. The room emptied around the argument. Even Nico, sensing the shape of it, backed toward the door. I'm going to be useful elsewhere where the bullets are less intimate. When we were alone, Dante came around the table. This ends tonight, he said. You do not step into that cellar. I held the ledger tighter. My father died trying to bring you this. If Vittorio burns it now, he kills him twice. Something fierce flashed in Dante's eyes. Do not use your dead against me. Then don't use my life to keep me decorative." The line landed. Hard. He looked away. Toward the burning window. Toward anything except my face. If I fail down there, then I would rather have been beside you than safe somewhere else, inventing different versions of the same grief. His mouth tightened. He took one step nearer, until the heat of the fires outside had nothing on the heat gathering between us. "I am asking for one thing," he said quietly. "Obey me in this." I should have. Love might have been easier if it asked smaller things. Instead, I reached up and took his hand. His fingers flexed once around mine before he seemed to realize what he was allowing. "You taught me what your world costs," I whispered. "I know now. Stage 1 of my fear had died somewhere between the freezer and the chapel. Stage 2 had ended on a train platform with torn paper in my hand. What stood in me now was choice. Terrible. Clear. I'm still here." He shut his eyes for one brief second, then he opened them and nodded toward the map. "Stay on my left. If I tell you to run, you run." It was not permission. It was trust. The reserve cellar stank of diesel by the time we got there. Smoke bled down the stone stairs. Vittoria's men had overturned crates to form barricades among the barrels. Family portraits watched from the corridor walls, their gilt frames blackening in the heat. Gunfire in a cellar sounded like the world trying to split its own teeth. Dante moved first. I stayed on his left. It was not bravery, not the clean kind. It was terror. With direction, I used my father's marks to navigate blind turns, storage rooms, side passages. Vittoria would assume no outsider knew. Twice I caught Dante's sleeve and stopped him from taking the wrong arch. Once I dragged a hose line free and doused a fuse trail seconds before it reached the chemical store. At the final chamber, Vittoria waited beside the oldest cask in the family reserve, the one painted with Dante's grandfather's crest. Fuel shone across the floor around it like dark water. "You brought her," Vittoria said, almost amused. "So there is softness after all." Dante's voice was flatter than the stone. "There is choice. You never understood the difference." Vittoria smiled. "Choice is a luxury men like us do not survive." He looked at me then, and I saw it. Not lust, not pity. Recognition. The mirror rule written in a human face. This was what Dante might have become if grief had carved everything tender out and called the empty shape strength. "You think she makes you better," Vittorio said. "What she makes you is vulnerable," Dante answered with a bullet. The chamber detonated into motion. One of Vittorio's men went down. Another hit the cask and spilled flaming oil in a crescent across the floor. Heat slammed upward. I dropped behind a stone press and crawled toward the side valve my father had marked in the margins of the ledger 30 times with increasing urgency. If fire flood the line, my hand slipped on soot. The wheel refused the first turn. Then the second. On the third it gave. An old reserve water blasted through the overhead pipe in a freezing sheet. Steam filled the chamber. In it, shapes moved like ghosts. Dante and Vittorio collided near the cask, knife to wrist, shoulder to throat, neither man speaking. That silence was worse than rage. It meant everything had already been decided below language. Vittorio drove the blade into Dante's side. I screamed his name. Dante did not. He only looked once toward me, one fractional break in concentration, one human reflex. And then he used it differently than Vittorio expected. He drove them both forward into the deepest pool of burning fuel where the sudden flood had thinned the fire, but not the slick beneath it. They went down hard. Dante came up first with the knife. Vittorio did not. For one terrible second, all I heard was water, steam, my own pulse, and somewhere far above the house groaning as another beam gave way to the fire. Then Dante got to his feet, blood dark on his shirt, and looked around the chamber that had built his family's name. "Out," he said. "The archive, out." I understood then. The charges, the fuel, the fire already in the vines. Saving the cellar would kill his men and leave Vittorio's poison buried in the walls forever. So Dante Salvatore did the cleanest, ugliest thing left. He let it burn. Outside, on the terrace above the reserve, we watched flame take the oldest part of his world. Nico stood a little behind us with Rosa's hand in his good one, both of them ash-streaked and silent. Men moved like shadows through smoke, carrying the wounded, counting the living. Dante's hand found mine. Not ownership, not command. A man touching the only solid thing left, the eastern roof collapsed inward with a roar. He watched it fall and said very quietly, "It is over." 3 months after the fire, the villa smelled less like smoke and more like plaster. Workmen came and went through the daylight hours. Stone had been replaced where it could be, left scarred where it couldn't. The old reserve remained a blackened shell below the terrace, fenced off not because it was unsafe anymore, but because some losses needed the dignity of being visible. Vittorio was dead. Matteo was dead. The family council had split like rotten wood under pressure. Half blamed Dante for burning legacy. The other half quietly moved their money into the legitimate export company he built from what the fire did not reach. Naples still spoke his name carefully, but differently now. As for me, I no longer lived in the East Wing like a well-kept witness. My dresses hung in the room beside his because he had not asked me to move into his, and I had not offered. Some boundaries, once crossed too cleanly, turned false. What we had after war was stranger than fantasy and steadier than panic. Earned. I think that is the word. My mornings belonged to the kitchen. Rosa had decided the rebuilt downstairs should feed people or it would turn mean. So we cooked. Not for mob dinners, not for private negotiations, for the staff, for the workmen, for the handful of local families Dante began employing after the fire took the old bottling line. Nico called it community outreach through carbohydrates and lurked shamelessly near the bread baskets while pretending he remained committed to discipline. "You can't keep eating like this," I told him one afternoon as he stole a third arancino off the tray. He clutched his chest. "Elena, 'tis shame an injured man in his own recovery arc." Rosa looked up from kneading dough. "If I marry you, it will only be to monitor your salt intake." Nico froze. I froze too. Rosa realized what she had said a second late and pointed the dough scraper at both of us. Not a word. Nico's eyes filled with such sincere wonder that I had to turn away to hide my smile. "I would like," he said carefully, as if one wrong syllable might spook the moment, "to discuss menu options for that hypothetical event." Rosa threw flour at him. Later, when the house quieted and evening turned the windows blue, I carried 2 bowls of pasta to Dante's office. He was standing by the desk with his jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled, reading contracts by the lamplight. The room still held one untouched crystal glass, though now it usually held water. He heard me before I knocked. "Come in." I set the bowls down. He looked at them, then at me. "You're feeding me strategically. You forget meals when paperwork insults you." His mouth shifted, the closest thing to a smile he offered other people these days. For me, I had learned there were rarer versions. He crossed the room and rested one knuckle against the crystal. Tap. The sound no longer made my stomach drop. It made something inside me settle. "How bad is it?" I asked. "The council wants ceremonies, statements, a performance of continuity." He sat and rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking older than I had ever seen him. "I want quiet. So choose quiet." That is advice from someone who walked back into a burning dynasty. I didn't say I was good at following my own guidance. A small silence opened between us, not empty. The kind that only existed after surviving enough to stop filling every gap with fear. He reached for my wrist as I turned to leave. Not hard. Never hard. "Elena." I looked down at his hand around me, then at him. There was a box on the desk, plain black velvet. I had somehow not seen it before, which meant he had placed it there deliberately and then waited too long to decide whether courage applied to men like him when the threat was happiness. My pulse tripped. He released my wrist and stood, as if sitting made the question smaller than it deserved to be. "I had a speech once," he said. "It was terrible. That startled a laugh out of me. He looked almost irritated by the sound, which only made it worse. So I burned it, he added. Of course you did. The box remained closed between us. He did not kneel. Thank God. If Dante Salvatore had knelt, I might have cried so hard I drowned both of us. Instead, he said, with that stripped-down honesty I trusted more than beautiful words, I don't know how to offer you safety. I can offer doors that lock, men who answer to your name, a house where your voice changes the air in every room, and the truth as often as I can bear to speak it. My eyes burned. He looked at them once and kept going anyway. I can offer you the part of me that still knows restraint because of you. I can offer you the rest of my life, little thief, if you still want the burden of it. I covered my mouth with my hand. That apparently undid him more than tears would have. He took one step nearer, stopped. Let me have the distance. I do, I whispered. Do what? I laughed through the ache in my throat. I hate that you need exact language at moments like this. His gaze softened by a degree that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else on earth. I do, I said again. I want it. I want you. I want the burden. Only then did he open the box. The ring inside was old, not delicate. A family stone reset into something simpler after the fire. History altered, not erased. I loved it immediately for that. When he slid it onto my finger, his hand was steady. Mine was not. Good, I thought suddenly. Good. Let there be one thing in this world that still makes us shake. That night we ate pasta at the kitchen table instead of in the dining room. Rosa pretended not to cry. Nico absolutely did cry and blamed onion fumes from 3 rooms away. The windows were open to summer air. Someone had left basil on the sill. My bare foot brushed Dante's ankle under the table and stayed there. 9 months later, the rebuilt tasting room opened on a Sunday. Dante hated ceremonies, so naturally half of Naples arrived. Not politicians, he had learned. Not council wives in expensive silk pretending the world had not burned around them. This gathering belonged to the people who had survived the fire with us, and the families now working the smaller vineyard rows planted where the old reserve once stood. Builders. Bottlers. 2 local chefs. Rosa in dark green with a wooden spoon still tucked into her apron pocket like a weapon of office. Nico beside her in a suit he claimed restricted emotional breathing. You cry today, Rosa warned him, and I tell everyone you fainted when I kissed you. Nico adjusted his cuff with great dignity. I did not faint. I descended gracefully under the pressure of profound love. I laughed so hard Dante looked over from across the room. There he was. Black suit, white shirt, no tie, the scar through his brow catching the gold of late afternoon. People gave him space without seeming to know they were doing it. That part had not changed. Perhaps it never would. Some shadows did not leave men like him. They just learned the shape of the house. Our house now. Though I still thought that carefully sometimes, the way Naples once thought his name. On the long oak table near the windows, crystal glasses waited beside the first bottles from the new press. Not many, just enough. Honest wine. That mattered to me more than abundance ever would. I moved through the guests, checking small things because that was still where my body went when it loved napkins, candle height, whether old Signora Bellucci had a chair with a proper back. By the time I reached Dante, he had one hand braced on the table and the other lifting a glass someone else had poured. Then I heard it. Tap. His signet ring against the crystal stem. Once. Twice. No one else in the room would have noticed the pause after. The fraction. The old ghost entering through his hand before it reached his mouth. 19 years old. A truce table. A mother dying because Crystal had looked harmless. He did not speak of it often. He did not need to. Trauma had its own dialect by then, and I had become fluent. My own hands began to shake, not from fear of him. Never that. Not anymore. From the recognition of the moment. From knowing what it cost him to stand in daylight holding a public glass while people watched his face for strength, and his enemies, fewer now, but not gone, waited for weakness to resemble an invitation. I stepped close enough that my sleeve brushed his wrist. He looked at me. I did not announce anything. I did not soften it with a smile for the crowd. I simply took his glass from his hand and replaced it with mine. The same gesture, the same theft, changed completely. A couple of nearby guests blinked. Nico, from across the room, went very still in that way. Funny men sometimes did when something mattered too much for jokes. Dante's eyes stayed on my face. I raised the glass I had taken from him and drank first. Not because I thought it was poisoned, because I knew memory could be. When I lowered it, the wine was bright and young and clean. Cherry, earth, salt from the sea air drifting in through the open doors. Safe. His throat moved once. "Elena," he said quietly. I handed the glass back. He did not take it. Instead, he set both glasses down and caught my shaking hand in his. There, in front of everyone, with the room gone almost reverently still around us, he looked at my fingers trembling against his palm, and I watched the exact moment recognition crossed his face. The dining room. The poisoned Barolo. The waitress whose fear had been visible and who moved anyway. He lifted my hand and pressed his mouth once to my knuckles. "Little thief," he said, warm now, entirely warm. The room exhaled. A few people smiled without understanding the half of it. Rosa cried openly. Nico pretended to inspect the charcuterie for structural defects. Somewhere outside, children laughed between the new vine rows. Dante finally took the glass. This time he drank. Later, after the guests were gone and the last plates stacked and the windows latched against the cooler night, we stood alone in the tasting room among the empty stems and candle stubs. Moonlight silvered the table. The smell of cork and polished oak and basil from Rosa's kitchen lingered in the quiet. Dante rested his ring against the nearest glass. Tap. I smiled before the second tap came. He noticed that too. Of course he did. "What?" he asked. "You still do that. It reminds me to pay attention." "To danger?" His hand closed around my waist and drew me in slowly, giving me time to stop him if I wanted. I didn't. "To what matters," he said. I laid my palm over the scar at his side, the one Vittorio had left and fire had nearly kept. Beneath it, his heartbeat moved calm and hard and faithful under my hand. The ordinary miracle of a man who had survived himself. "I almost left," I said into the space between us. His gaze sharpened. "I know." "No." I shook my head. "I mean, I still think about her sometimes. The girl on the platform, the one who could have had Paris." He was quiet long enough for the house to settle around us. Then he said, "I think about the man who would have let you go." That was the unresolved thing, I think. Not whether we loved each other. We did. Not whether we had chosen. We had. But whether love changed the cost of what had been chosen, or only taught two people how to carry it without looking away. I touched the base of his glass and slid it an inch farther from the edge of the table. He watched my hand, still shaking. Just a little. Still moving anyway. And when he smiled, it was small and private and so beautiful I felt it where old fear used to live. This time, when I stole his glass, he let me.